also on the notation itself. Same on the day after and the day after that as well. And then the last one, I will talk about the intention, more about the choreographer and how we get the intention on paper. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to be reading off because I've got quite a lot of slides that I want to show, and so I hope it's a better way to follow. In order to understand why the need for dance notation arose, we must explore its origins and development. And this process reaches further back in history than we may be aware of. The potential of a movement or dance notation system in recording and reproducing dance is generally more appreciated by those who have studied and worked with it in dance and other fields of research. The attraction to one or other system of notation usually lies in its fascinating analytical and reproduction properties. If we take a stroll through the history of dance, we are bound to find many pictorial examples, references to published scripts, and explanations of a variety of so-called notation systems. But let us first concentrate on some earlier ways of communicating the existence of movement and dance. Some pictorial records of dance or movement reach back to the ancient history of our world, where performances have occurred since the dawn of human cultures. And together with the ancient runes, art, in all its visual manifestations, is also one of the few things that have survived over centuries. At a time when oral history was prominent, art was used to tell stories relating to the beliefs and modes of an era. Based on archaeological as well as anthropological evidence, both secular and sacred rituals have usually involved one or more of the performance genres of theatre, dance, and music. In Animals and the Origins of Dance, Stephen Lonsdale writes, much of prehistory is dance history, and much of dance history is prehistory. We can therefore optimistically conclude that the many ancient rock paintings hidden in so many parts of the world, displaying animals in certain positions, depicting dances of courtship, mating, and fertility, are in fact among the first notations of dance. For Lonsdale, the connection between animals and dance found in myths and folk tales stretches back to the beginnings of human existence, with evidence found in the caves that date back to the Stone Age. Here we see a picture of a rock painting from the Bambetka rock shelters showing a hunting dance. It is located in central India and dates back to circa 5500 BC. There is something mysterious about the compulsive regularity of animal movement, with its precise athletic and rhythmic motion in action that impresses man. In Greek mythology, it is the beauty, energy, and streamlined movement of horses that caught the attention of poets and providing the platform for dancing. Like the satyrs, who were the constant companions of Dionysus, god of wine, dance, and drama. In early Greek drama, actors dressed up as satyrs by putting on masks with goat's ears and strapping around their waists horses' tails that waved about behind them when they danced. The Greeks danced in bacchanalian and other ceremonies, with the proof usually recorded on vases. Sophocles wrote tragedies, but was also trained as a dancer and musician, and like others included dancers in his plays and choruses. The Greeks believed that man took delight in active movement. A person was considered educated if he could dance, and his moral code was defined by the dances he performed. Men and women in Greek society danced, though what they performed might not be considered dance today. It was an ordered form integrated with music and poetry as part of rituals, religion, and social life. Many cultures have preserved their traditional customs, wherein the hunting and healing dances and secret ritual performances are still of major importance. Descendants who have preserved their culture's origin handed down to each next generation have maintained the choreographies of these dances that are performed at special celebrations. This picture depicts a dance performed before the animal totem of the deceased, who was thereby united with his animal origins. This is only a part of a long Aboriginal funerary process. It is, of course, difficult for an outsider to study cultures that have survived mainly through oral tradition. Access to some of their secret codes can be seen as an intrusion. It is, however, in some cultures an important aspect to be respected. The only remnants of dances belonging to some ancient cultures that may have disappeared exist as paintings on vases and on ancient temples and tombs. These paintings, drawings, and hieroglyphics can be seen as some other form of notation involving positioning and the rare possibility of rhythmic motion. Over 6,000 years ago, Egypt made use of the dance at festival occasions as well as its religious ritual, and used hieroglyphics to represent dance movements. It would be hard to figure out what the movements were, not to mention what the movements meant. The ancient Egyptians apparently loved to dance, but the evidence of ancient Egyptian dance comes from murals found on the walls of the tombs and the temples, and there would be limited information of the precise movements. And in some cases, the performing moves are more closely associated with acrobatics and gymnastics than strictly dancing. Within these movements, we may only assume such elements as rhythm and dynamics, and together with the study of ancient Egyptian music, perhaps we may be able to reconstruct the bare essentials of these dances. I've not studied the meanings of any of the Egyptian hieroglyphics, but I thought it could be interesting to show the following examples. Here we have the verb and the noun for dance. And for the word turn. This photograph is a still from a video I took during a visit to Egypt in 1994. The particular pose looks a lot like it could have been inspired actually and used in a ballet or two. Because often one sees this kind of pose in ballet. Marius Petipa, you've probably heard of him, he wrote all the big classics, choreographed the Pharaoh's Daughter in 1862. And that was his first huge success, and it is still performed today. You can find probably a copy on YouTube if you look for it. It's 2 hours long. At a very early period, the Hebrews gave dancing a high place in their ceremony of worship. Moses made the children of Israel dance after the crossing of the Red Sea. David danced before the Ark of the Covenant. And the Bible is full of instances describing the place of the dance in the lives of the people of that time. In Yemen, where Jews were banned from dancing publicly, forms of dance evolved that are based on stationary hopping and posturing, such as can be done in confined spaces. Today, this type of dance is called a Yemenite and is a common dance step in Israeli folk dancing and in popular dance performed during weddings and other Jewish occasions. It's actually quite interesting. I went on YouTube to try and find it, and there were different people showing how to do it. Each person is slightly different. There was a man who started with his 1 foot, ball of the foot on the ground, and then he would just go. And obviously they'd sometimes do that in circles, and then you would find some other people standing like that, and then do a totally different feel about it. but quite interesting. I tried to notate it, which is a very simple way of notation to do that specific one. All over the world, folk dances are an important aspect of many cultures. The question is often asked, how do we preserve dances like these? Of course, cultures evolve, but much that was important at some time may get lost if there is no interest in its preservation. But if we deemed it necessary, how would we record such a dance? These days, the first thing that usually springs to mind is video. But for a proper study and analysis, it would be ideal to employ one of the presently used notation systems. As Anne Hutchinson Guest, who wrote an authoritative book on dance notation, states, using just words can prove to be ambiguous and would need a lot of description. The interpretation of each person would most probably prove to be different. Any form of notation, if used to its full potential, will describe a process towards the end result, and effectively its function is both to preserve and hopefully to reproduce. I'd like to briefly share with you just a few examples of the many different notations that have sprung up over 3 centuries. Please note that this notation is often in fine detail, in notation in general, and you're not expected to be able to read or see every little detail. The manual titled Choreography by Toine Arbeau was first published in 1589. It provides information on social ballroom behavior and on the interaction of musicians and dancers. The publication includes many dance tabulations in which extensive instructions for the steps are lined up next to the musical notes. It is apparently the most detailed and authentic record of 15th and 16th century dances. The page on the left, which is in French, I sourced from the Library of Congress, and it's from a book given by a father to his son with the inscription dated 1850. And the one on the right is from my own library. You can still buy the book today. Is from an English publication from 1967. Here we have an example using the Cadet System, the system called Choreography, or the Art of Describing Dance, which was published in 1700 by Raoul Auguste Fulet, was in fact originated by the ballet master Pierre Beauchamp. And the notator is John Weaver, who had published a translation of the book in English in 1706. So one can still find all books on these systems that are still written today and copied out. Here we have another example recorded in the Cadet System. This is the notation of a new dance composed by Mr. Isaac, notated by John Weaver and performed at court on the 6th of February 1707, the birthday of Queen Anne of England, Scotland and Ireland at that stage. Fulet's system is based on a center line which traces the dancer's path across the floor, and hence it is referred to as a track system. And the black dot indicating the start, and the angular line at the end representing the foot. But don't ask me which black dot or which angular line. It is quite complicated. That's a whole dance, in fact. In this in a piece of notation, which is Laba notation, the choreographer combines words with movement. And Laba notation normally reads from the bottom of the page upwards. And in this example, the line in the middle shows the words with an accompanying rhythm notation. So you would have the music going up like that, reading it like that, and then the words were just written next to them that way. This example is in Danish movement notation. and shows a scenographical plan of the structure on the stage, which is usually written in the margin, that is on the back of the previous page of the score. And that whole structure is in the entire stage. You can actually find a film of this on YouTube, if you remember that name. In Rossignol, the committed involvement of the 10 performers moving through the air, suspended by running harnesses, were confronted with the loss of their fundamental relationship with the ground. Now that's sort of quite a sort of philosophical explanation, but if you watch it, it looks quite weird, but it's interesting. Next we see a page in Benish movement notation of Veronica Paper's John the Baptist. It is at the very beginning of the ballet where you see John's head on a tray. I mean, you can't see the head. It's just that this is a drawing of the tray, and this is his position. He's kneeling, facing the front, and it's just, that's the music written above. Although we can indicate timing in the Benish movement notation, I chose to show the music line above the notation to indicate the relationship of music to notation for ease of reading. So you see the music up here, and then kind of continuing over here, because sometimes the choreography isn't done exactly on specific beats of the music, so it sometimes goes through the music, so you've got to be able to indicate that. Apart from full works being notated in the one or other system, choreographers may develop their personal notations or drawings as reminders and experiments for their own choreographic ideas, like Mary Wigman. Those are her own charcoal drawings, or pencil and paper. Wigman was a dancer, choreographer, and pioneer of expressionist dance. And the work is called Totenmal, which I think is about killing. It was sort of, I think, during the Second World War, just afterwards. This sketch shows the next one, some ideas of Wigman's Rites of Spring to Stravinsky's music. And these are works they still perform, and you can actually on YouTube find them. YouTube is incredible these days. The dance mime work Technicolor of Philippe Decoufflet features in turn a disappointed lover, that's the cast, an injured and amnesiac zouave, a playboy dandy adventurer, and an abandoned acrobat. A cast of characters in a world where everything seems possible. So those are his own notes. And often the choreographers do that. They make their own notes, and that in fact becomes art. And it becomes, so all little scribbles of choreographers, it becomes very valuable after a while. And here we see some scribbles of an unfinished work by Merce Cunningham, American dancer and choreographer who was at the forefront of American modern dance for more than 50 years. And you can also find quite a bit on him on YouTube as well. They still teach his ballets. He's got his own technique. They teach his technique as well in America in certain schools. And he only died, I think, a few years ago. And then this one is a preparatory drawing of ideas by Jean-Marc Matos, who is a movement artist and choreographer, involved in dance and interdisciplinary performance using various technologies. So it's one of those sort of things that happens these days in the contemporary dance scene as well. People use all sorts of different things. It's not just ballet or contemporary dance. It's kind of all different ideas. And it kind of falls in between theatre and dance, or performance art, in a sense. The word choreography, or choreography, as it was originally used in the early part of the 20th century, refers to the art of composing ballets and other dances and planning and arranging the movements, steps and patterns of dancers, or the technique of representing the various movements in dancing by a system of notation. Because there's the idea that you see that they say choreology is the logic of dance and choreography is the writing of dance. So, in fact, the two words are the wrong way around, used the wrong way around, perhaps. Okay, so this is, and it shows the technique of representing the various movements in dancing by a system of notation. So, derived from the Greek, the literal translation of the word choreology is the science of dance. It was the name given by Rudolf and Joan Benisch to their system of notation. It is interesting, though, that the word choreology was first used by Rudolf Laban, and within his studies of the body in space. In Laban's choreography, so all these choreology, with these kind of words, represents the study of circles. So one went ahead. Now, from the book on Uncourteous by A.V. Cotten, published in 1944, we read, Laban already in his early days felt very strongly about the necessity of a workable system of dance notation, comparable in simplicity and accuracy to that admirable achievement of combined artistic and intellectual effort which we have today in our system of musical notation. The history of music would be unthinkable without the existence of musical notation. A similarly significant development may be expected for the art of choreography by a competent and generally practical dance notation. I've gone back, yeah. Okay, Cotten, this A.V. Cotten guy, said, and this is still in 1944, it was a frequent suggestion to record a dance or a ballet by means of filming it. But it would have been impossible to reconstruct a ballet from film, just as impossible as it would have been for a conductor without a musical score to rehearse even a special, simple piece of music with his orchestra from a gramophone record. So in those days, people thought like that already. They didn't realize we would have video in the way we have it now. One can only imagine how difficult and awkward it would have been at that time, having to set up the projector and screen in the studio. These days, some people like to and will use video to reconstruct a dance work, but it could only really be successful if the producer already knows the work very well, or the choreographer may prefer to work in this way. Using dancers who were part of the original cast could also be an added benefit. Using the video again, that will relate to the last lecture where we talk about copyright and things like that. That can cause another problem. Those who do not have the luxury of a notator, or in the absence of a choreographer, are probably not always aware of how much can get lost as the production gets passed on from one person to the next. If the choreographer is teaching the ballet, it could be a question of wanting to either stay faithful to the original creation or to make changes. Needless to say, the ballet company in Cape Town in its golden years had the luxury of one or even two notators at any one time, when there was still money. There are three major systems of dance notation, and perhaps the odd other ones that are still being used. Shortly, Laban, Benisch, and Eschol-Wachmann. There's also the Conte notation system, originated by Pierre Conte and others. It was finally published under the name Technique Générale in 1955, and probably used to a much lesser degree than the three major ones. Laban movement analysis, or sometimes called Laban-Bartenieff movement analysis, is a method and a language for describing visualizing, interpreting, and documenting all varieties of human movement. It is one type of Laban movement study, originating from the work of Rudolf Laban and developed and extended by Lusa Ullmann, Irmgard Bateniev, and Warren Lamb, among others. One of Laban's primary contributions to Laban movement analysis are his theories of space. This category involves motion in connection with the environment and with spatial patterns, pathways, and lines of spatial tension. Laban notation is also used in various educational programs by institutions and training, contemporary training especially. And there are many also in dance therapy. In London at the Laban Institute, they do courses in dance therapy through the Laban. And there are many notated works deposited, especially the Dance Notation Bureau in New York. These can be accessed for study, reference, and reproduction. British movement notation is still strong in some professional companies, primarily in Europe, UK, and Australia, for reproductions of ballets, whether purely classical or with contemporary influences, as well as pure contemporary works. British notators are mostly in full-time employment and work closely with their assigned choreographers. The governing body of British movement notation is British International, formerly known as the British Institute, and is now part of the Royal Academy of Dance. A 2-year distance learning course is offered, with another year working with a professional company, project-based to receive qualification as a British movement notator. All the practical examination syllabi of the Royal Academy of Dance are published in British movement notation. Scores are lodged at British International for safekeeping and available for reference and study with the appropriate granted permissions. Just to add to that, when it was still the British Institute, its patron was Princess Diana. And then when she divorced, of course, they couldn't get the money with the Royal Command performances, etc. So they had to then join, be part of the Royal Academy of Dance, which is not a bad idea anyway. In her book, Dance Notation, the process of recording movement on paper, again, Anne Hutchinson Guest discusses various notation systems, 85 or so, mainly involving dance, that have sprung up through the ages. She also expresses the necessity to look at the wider field of movement notation, the recording of any kind of movement, whether it is gymnastics, sports, therapeutic exercises, anthropological studies, or even the actions of men or objects in outer space. In fact, with the British system, we do gymnastics as well, notate gymnastics. There's also a clinical service where physiotherapists in England use them for, and I think they carried it over to Japan. I think people in Japan still use it. Okay, the important truth is that choreography has been called the throwaway art, because as many ballets were allowed, so many ballets were allowed to be forgotten. No attempt being made to make even verbal notes or even draw floor plans. There's a myriad of, if you go through history and you read about certain ballets that people had choreographed, there was just no record of it, and especially if it was done earlier on in the century when there was no film or video that they used, they could never reproduce the works. But there was notation. The greatest flowering of dance notation occurred in the 18th century, when it was used by and for the educated classes. But following the French Revolution, notation fell into decline, partly through the fact that development of dance became centered in the theater rather than in the court, where it originally started. Because ballet started originally at the court of Louis XIV, because he was a dancer himself. Professional dancers came from the lower classes. The stigma which the educated classes attached to dance, particularly in the Victorian and Edwardian eras, discouraged the emergence of literally inclined dancers and hence impeded the development and use of a notation which would function in the same way as music notation. Dancers were not expected or encouraged to have brains. Their brains were in their feet. Guest's definition of dance notation is the translation of four-dimensional movement, time being the fourth dimension. So we have the three dimensions, and then we have time as a fourth dimension, and then sorry, I've lost my place. She adds that the fifth dimension, that of dynamics, should be considered and accepted as an integral part. On the fourth lecture, we will deal with dynamics. All movement is far from simple. It reflects life's complexities. Therefore, so much care must be taken in how it is viewed, perceived, and interpreted beyond the superficial, before it is written down. Guest claims that dance is really the science of movement, combined with art. For each field of movement study, the eye needs to be trained. Using just words can prove to be ambiguous, and you would need a lot of description. The interpretation of each person would most probably prove to be different, as I've said before. To be considered is whether a notation system would only state the practical facts of a movement, or should also include the idea behind it, the concept and the motivation. So there's a lot more involved than just the physical movement. In the late 19th century, Vladimir Stepanov had formulated a system of notation that was taken into the curriculum of the theatre schools of St. Petersburg and Moscow. Alexander Gorsky published a Russian manual on the system in 1899, and by 1903, Nicholas Sergeyev was made repetiteur and became responsible for notating the major works in the repertoire of the Russian ballet. A total of 24 Petipa ballets had been recorded by 1917. With the advent of the Russian Revolution, Sergeyev secretly left Russia, taking the scores with him, packed in crates. Diaghilev made use of Sergeyev's memory and scores for the Sleeping Princess production in London in 1921. And Ninette Valwa employed him to teach Coppelia, Giselle, and the Sleeping Beauty to the Vic Wells dancers in the early days. After that, he linked up with Mona Inglesby's International Ballet. And I don't know if anybody's heard of Mona Inglesby. She was a British ballerina that did all this, and nobody seems to know about it, especially in England. They kind of pushed us aside for one or other reason. But remember that name. She had the International Ballet, which toured for 10 years doing the classics. And these productions were the closest to what had been seen in Russia. When Sergeyev died, Inglesby became the custodian of the scores, and in the 1960s it was sold to the Harvard Theatre Collection in Massachusetts. By the year 2000, Sergei Vikarev, a dancer with the Mariinsky Ballet, had reconstructed the Sleeping Beauty from these scores. The ballet was seen in London and New York. Two more ballets followed, La Bayadere and Coppelia, and more recently, Alexei and Tatiana Ratmansky, remember that name, were starting to reconstruct some gems from the past, notably a new production of Giselle, drawing from notations made in 1899 of Act 2 and in 1903 of Act 1 by Nikolai Sergeyev. The Ratmanskys also studied a lesser-known earlier account by Henri Justement, a French choreographer who documented a Paris production around 1860. Now, either it was yesterday or it was going to be next Sunday. There's the live screening at the Fugard of this Giselle, which they've recently completed. So it's getting back to the original things before people tried to make it better. Referring to the Eshkol-Bachmann system, guest comments, the approach to movement is mathematical and logical, and the analysis of movement is based on the fact that the structure of the joints of the body dictates that every movement is circular in nature, taking place within a sphere. In the Eshkol-Bachmann book, it is explained that the field of interest of this notation is the formal aspect of movement alone. So it's not to be, no dramatics, in fact. The following examples are just to give you an idea of what the notation looks like. Here you see the manuscript page showing the body parts are divided up. You see the top there, the hand, forearm, upper arm, shoulder, again hand, forearm, upper, and then head, neck, so, and it's got different numbers to it. And here the body parts are numbered, referring to the previous graph. And here is just an example of a position of the body with the numbers written there. So that actually is the position that this person is taking. It's actually a very interesting drawing, I find, very full of a lot of strength. The intelligibility and practicability of a system of notation should be measured by its ability to describe all the potential phenomena in a defined field of interest, independently of stylistic appearances, which are characteristic and special. And the body may be seen as an orchestra in which every limb is used as a separate instrument. Though in some aspects independent, these instruments, being interconnected, influence one another by their movements. This is all Eshkol-Bachmann. Abraham Bachmann was an architect and mathematician, and Noah Eshkol was a dancer, an artist, and they developed the system in Israel. And it's still, you can buy the book and the notation as well, but I'll show you some other things just now of the choreography. In this video that's followed, it's called Angles and Angels, and the only accompaniment used in all of her works is the ticking sound of the metronome. So, and it's also devoid of any emotions or anything. It's just the movement for movement's sake from the idea of the notation. I mentioned the Yemenite dance earlier. In 1971, a notated collection of 142 variations of the Yemenite Jewish folk dance was published by the Movement Notated Society, the former name of Noah Eshkol Foundation. So you see there's so many different things in every little movement that have different meanings sometimes, and the way people do them. The social anthropologist John Lackey wrote, I don't know if you heard about John Lackey. He did research on Venda people. He was, I think, in Australia. He was president of Australia. Notation in itself is a kind of pre-analysis of dance, whose practice sharpens the user's observations. And Benish notation is interestingly different from other kinds of notation in that it can be neatly combined with music notation, and its essentially visual characteristics make it particularly appropriate for theatre dance. Some texts also refer to movement and dance notation systems as a language of communication. Indeed, we will experience that idea later as we begin to study Benish movement notation. Actually described as the language of dance by its creators Rudolf and Joan Benish. Rudolf Benish philosophically referred to reading as the gateway to knowledge and writing the tool of thought. Here we have the voices of Rudolf and Joan Benish talking about Benish movement notation that was developed in the late 1940s to help his wife Joan.
It was developed by Rudolf Benish in the late 40s to help his wife Joan.
Way back in 1947, I was a dancer. I was working in commercial shows. I was choreographing the dance scenes and dance sequences. And I never liked to go into a rehearsal without I knew what I was going to do. And my husband found, well, he wasn't my husband at the time, he was my fiancé, and he found me making all kinds of scribbles and writing laser steps down to try and memorize what I was going to do the next day. It was about 2 weeks after that, when I was away on tour, I received a packet full of the first beginnings of the notation. And from then, I was able to write down an awful lot. It acted as a kind of aid to memory in those days. It was certainly better than just writing down the thought part of shot.
Useful for Joan Benish in her work, and a fascinating exercise for her artist-mathematician husband. But why should it be generally applied to dance, which has been around as long as we have? These days you can film or video a performance, so why write it down?
Well, opera companies, drama companies, orchestras, even ministers' offices, all have their recording devices now, but they still need to use notation. Their notation, of course, being music, writing, and figures. The reason is that notation and recording devices are two completely different means for completely different purposes. You couldn't give an orchestral conductor a record and say, play this. In other words, you cannot study from a tape or film, you can only study from the actual score.
And here is choreologist and Benish tutor Diana Curry.
Notation is based on a series of dots, dashes, crosses, small horizontal and vertical marks, which represent the position of a dancer's limbs in relation to their own body. Notation is rather like plotting a series of film stills.
Diana Curry, describing Benish movement notation. Imagine those stills film directors use. Some, like Fellini and Scorsese, draw meticulous storyboards showing exactly how the scene should look. Benish does it with dots and dashes on a 5-line stage, just like musicians, presenting dancers and choreographers with written ballet.
And now a video with choreographer Christopher Wheeldon and Benish choreologist Anna Trevian talking about Benish movement notation.
When preserving works, how would you compare using video versus using Benish notation?
Well, having the ballet written in the book, first of all, is a huge privilege. And the knowledge that the original intention, my original intention, is accurately preserved. What happens with video, more often than not, is there'll be a mistake in a rehearsal and the dancer relearning a ballet might copy that mistake, and then that mistake might find its way into the performance, which is also videoed, and then another dancer in the future may copy another mistake. So over the course of time, you're essentially diluting that intention. Whereas with a score, you have it for all time. There's no mistaking, you know, head this way, arm that way, move to the left on this count of the music. It's brilliantly accurate. Jacqueline Barrett, my assistant, and Anna Trebian, the notator. So all of the steps are notated in this score. So this is a very precious book indeed. You know as well as I do, with my process, I'm constantly changing because we do make improvements to productions as they go, and then of course the notation then has to be adjusted accordingly, and sometimes another company might look slightly different during a certain step, so then you adjust it to fit them, and I know that can be sometimes a source of frustration for the notator, because then then the score has to be adjusted, and some of those changes stay for good, and some of them fluctuate a little bit, but the basic structure of the ballet and the essence is kept there in that very, very precious writing.
So that's what's nice, is like for Alice, for example, we have the original score from when we created it here, and then we went to Canada, and we've gone to many locations with it, and we can, I have my little notes in it, and I can put, in Canada actually we did this version, and it stays in Canada, and in Denmark we do that version, in London we do this one, and we can have those options.
But you'll always have the original, we'll always have that as the template.
And some of them stay and go, they will create changed in one location and then come back, and we add that change to the other productions around the world, and other ones that just stay in those locations because they're more specific, I guess. And how do you use Benish notation as part of your legacy that you want to leave, your choreographic legacy?
I do not think about leaving behind a choreographic legacy. I just go from ballet to ballet. But certainly at this stage in my career, when I'm fortunate enough to have ballets being restaged all over the world, the knowledge that the original ballet is in a book and can be read and interpreted by a notator, and then accurately restaged, that for me is such a luxury. I certainly feel very fortunate to have had that, particularly for my works here at the Royal Ballet.
How can you describe the use of Benish notation during the creation process versus when you're restaging and remounting the ballet?
Well, again, it's very useful because often when I'm staging a new ballet, the work's coming out of me, but I'm not retaining. And you probably know better than anyone because you've been so many times in the studio with me. And so it's very helpful for me to turn to you or whoever's in the room and say, Anna, what did we do yesterday? Or what, if you already have it down on the page, you're able to, very clearly answer, it was this, on this leg, and we went this way. And so again, it's sort of in the moment accuracy.
And it frees you to be able to choreograph further.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't have to be thinking about sort of restaging something that perhaps I'd choreographed a week earlier and had gone out of my head at that point.
And what would you say are the advantages of using a choreologist in the studio?
Well, I mean, having the support really of another person in the room who is kind of as attuned to the choreography as it's being made as I am. That's really hugely beneficial, I think, in the process. It keeps it moving.
Absolutely. And when we're restaging a ballet, how do you think for the dancers to be taught the steps and for completing their cast from a choreologist? What advantages do that have for the dancer that's learning and taking on a new role?
Well, again, I think it comes down to accuracy, and also there's a patience and a sort of thoroughness when you're teaching the movement from score. Sometimes a rehearsal director might say, okay, let's just go and look at the video. Everyone come around, gather around the video, look at the video, and a dancer might be looking at the wrong dancer, there may have been a mistake in the performance. So having a notator there to actually say, okay, so the leg goes this way, the head goes this way, the arm lifts this high, is a more thorough, and perhaps in the long term it's easier for the dancer to then integrate into their movement language, into their body language.
So they can straight away take it in.
Yeah.
Okay, when Benesch movement notation was first conceived in 1947, by Rudolf Benesch, he had Leonardo da Vinci's famous Vitruvian Man in mind and drew 5 lines over the human figure, thereby placing it on the music stave. He felt that the music stave, which already carries an oral notation, could also carry a visual one. So it's really the Vitruvian Man that he drew the lines over. In an article on the use of Benesch notation in robot motion research, Iliana Mirzabekians, the professor of Benesch notation at the Paris Conservatoire, wrote that Rudolf Benesch organized the stave in order to easily identify 3 key elements: time, specified above the stave, body movement specified within the stave, and spatial orientation specified below the stave. This organization of the stave facilitates the analysis and description of postures in time and space, and enables the reader to integrate the 3 elements as a whole. The stave was also refined to have